Okay, so let me begin by recalling where we were yesterday. Okay. So you have been computing the divergent part of the annulus one-point function, okay, appropriately normalized, of the closed string tachyon. And here I should just clarify what exactly one means by divergent part. Okay. So here by divergent part, I will mean anything that has not been included in the finite parts. So not everything that we analyze will be divergent necessarily, okay, but anything that has not been included in the finite part is what we are including, okay, because that's the extra term that we have to keep track of. So far we analyzed that the simplest one, the worldsheet contribution to the divergent part. Okay, this is obtained simply by taking the DRY formula for the divergent part and then appropriately treating them using string field theory. So you saw that we have a sum of 4 Feynman diagrams, and then each of these Feynman diagrams can be explicitly evaluated. Okay, the results are given here. We see that the contribution from the region D, okay, that the contact interaction that has a complicated form, okay, including dependence on this function f of beta, okay, which appeared in the choice of the 3-point vertex of one closed string and two open strings. Okay. But of course, at the end, all of these has to go away, okay, and we will see that they do go away at the end. Okay, so next we consider the psi1 exchange contribution. Now, as I alluded to yesterday, if you look at these 4 diagrams, you could have put psi1 anywhere, okay, and you have to include the contribution of psi1 exchange. So, for example, you could put psi1 here and a regular propagator here, or you could put psi1 in both, and so on. But we have also seen that that 2-point vertex of a closed string and an open string psi1 actually vanishes. Okay, this is because of the specific choice of vertex that we made, which basically means that we cannot put a psi1 here or a psi1 here. So that rules out these two possibilities, that putting a psi1 here and putting a psi1 here. So the only place where you can put psi1 is either here or here, and that gives rise to these 2 diagrams, okay, which I have displayed here. Okay. And the way to compute these 2 diagrams, okay, for example, suppose you take this down, this one, is that psi1 propagator you already know, it's minus half. Okay. So you calculate the 3-point vertex of one closed string and a pair of psi1s, and then multiply it by minus half. And again, it's easier to normalize by comparing this with the tachyon exchange graph, okay, for which you already have an answer. Okay. So for tachyon exchange, the propagator is minus 1, and the 3-point vertex of course will involve one closed string and a pair of tachyons. So you calculate the ratio where the normalization ambiguities will go away, and then multiply it by the known result for this graph when this line is a tachyonic line. Now there are 2 complications in evaluating these diagrams, okay, which I have listed here. First is this partial C, that's the vertex operator associated with psi1, the C01 vacuum. This is not a primary, and because it's not a primary, this combination that enters the correlation function has extra terms. But this, of course, you have already encountered before. Okay, even the 3-point function had this, the 4-point function had the 3-level 4-point function had this kind of terms. Okay. So this you know how to deal with. The other complication that comes is that the construction of the integrated vertex operator is more complicated. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by this. So here we have a 3-point function of one closed string and a pair of open strings. So the closed string carries the unintegrated closed string vertex operator carries ghost number 2, and each of the unintegrated open string vertex operator carries ghost number 1. Okay, so that's ghost number 4. That's of course too many ghosts for the upper half plane. So you have to transform one of the open string vertex operators into integrated vertex operator. Okay, that's what you normally do. And that's simple when the vertex operator has a structure of C times a matter primary of dimension 1. But this is not the case here. So the construction of the integrated vertex operator from here is not absolutely obvious. And this is something that I'll discuss maybe at the end of the talk, because the discussion is somewhat technical. But this is something that has to be taken care of. Also, this amplitude has one integral to do, okay, because the beta has to be integrated over. Remember that we parameterize the vortex by placing the closed string vortex operator at I and the pair of open string vortex operators at beta and minus beta. But then beta has to be integrated from 1 over 2 lambda tilde to 1. So we do need an integrated or an analog of an integrated vortex operator for one of the psi ones. So nevertheless, as I said, there's a well-defined algorithm and this can be computed. I'll try to discuss the procedure at the end because this may not be of interest to everybody. Here what I have done is to give the result from the psi1 exchange terms. Okay, and that's the result that we get. So now we turn to the next problem, the next contribution that comes to the same function g of omega, and that involves field redefinition of the translational zero modes. But maybe before I go ahead, are there any questions on the psi1 exchange contribution? Okay, so let me proceed. So let me first recall what the problem was or what the problem is. So let's denote by phi the zero mode of the open string field theory associated with the state that is C1 alpha minus 1 on the vacuum. So this has L0 equal to 0. This is in the Siegel case. So this is a regular zero mode. And we expect that this zero mode or this zero mode field phi should be related by field redefinition to the collective coordinate phi tilde, which translates the d instanton along the time direction. This basically means take the d instanton, okay, where you have put a Dirichlet boundary condition on x. So you put x at some value, call that value phi tilde. And that phi tilde now can be shifted, right? That phi tilde can be anything. So that zero mode, that collective mode, phi tilde, we expect should be related to this mode phi that we see in the open string field theory. And this is not just for d instantons, for every d brane. The transverse position of the d brane, in fact, is one of the modes of the open string on the d brane. So there is some relationship between phi and phi tilde. Now, on the other hand, if we take any amplitude in some background phi tilde field, okay, so what do you mean by background phi tilde field? Background phi tilde field means that the d instanton is placed not at x equal to 0 but at x equal to phi tilde. That's what I mean by background phi tilde. And in this case, it's easy to convince yourself that the amplitude or the phi tilde dependence of the amplitude will have the form of e to the minus I omega phi tilde, where omega is the total energy that is carried by all the vortex operators. This is just simple e to the I omega t factor that we get when you place an object at time t, or in this case a time phi tilde. And so this is the usual Fourier mode, the Fourier transformation variable. But since we will be determining the relationship between phi and phi tilde as a power series expansion, we expand this out and write this as 1 minus I omega phi tilde plus half I omega phi tilde square and so on. And then we will try to match power by power, okay, what we get for the coupling of phi to what we expect for the coupling for phi tilde from this structure. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, so this also has another feature that because of this dependence, simple dependence on phi tilde, once we carry out the phi tilde integral, which is what we are supposed to do at the end, we get a simple delta function. Okay, and this delta function is what eventually ensures that total energy is conserved. Okay, but this is done at the very end of the calculation. But in open string field theory that we are using, of course, the path integral is not supposed to be done over phi tilde. It's supposed to be done over phi, because phi is the open string field. And in an open string field theory, you are supposed to path integrate over all the open string fields. So the strategy that we will follow is to first make a change of variable from phi to phi tilde And in doing this change, making this change of variable, you have to keep track of the measure. Once you have changed the variable from phi to phi tilde, then the phi tilde dependence takes the simple form. But this is the form, this is the property of phi tilde dependence that we'll be using to make this change of variable. And once you have brought in this form, then you can carry out the phi tilde integral. So to do that, you have to find the change of variable from phi to phi tilde. And the important point here is that this change of variable in the path integral will induce a measure that you have to keep track of. Are there questions?
One question. So this phi is like a pure gauge mode, like it was, or did I miss something? C1 alpha minus 1 on 0.
No, it's not a pure gauge mode, it's physical state. Right? There is no state, there is no state on which QB acting on that state gives you this. It is not a pure gauge mode.
Oh, okay.
It is a physical state. Okay, so let's do a computation. So what we will try to do is to let's compute the CCO amplitude with phi as external O state. And the goal is to check if the CCO amplitude has a structure of I omega times the CC amplitude. Then phi will be directly equal to phi tilde, right? Because we expect that the CCO amplitude should be, because O is phi, if it had been phi tilde, then it would be just I omega times the CC amplitude, okay, or minus I omega times the CC amplitude, and that's what you want to test. So the CCO amplitude we can compute in the following way. So let's place the first C at I, that we can always do. We still have one conformal killing vector left because we have only fixed two of the positions, two of the coordinates. So using the last conformal killing vector, we set the imaginary part of the second C coordinate to 0. So we place it at IY, where Y is an arbitrary real number. And then of course the O we can place anywhere. Okay? There is no conformal killing vectors left. So we place the O at U. Okay? And then you have to integrate over the position Y and U. Okay? That's the CCO amplitude. Now let's first do it naively. Let's first do this computation naively by keeping these two fixed and trying to carry out the U integral first. That's actually not very difficult because at U we have a vertex operator partial x, okay, because we are using integrated vertex operator. C has been stripped off. So here it's partial x, and here you have the x dependence is e to the I omega x, right, or e to the minus I omega 1 x here, and e to the minus I omega 2 x here. Now, because we have in the upper half plane, we are in the upper half plane, by standard doubling trick, we can regard this e to the I omega x. Instead of using upper half plane, we can think of this as a full complex plane. And instead of having e to the I omega x only at I, you can place e to the I omega x at I and e to the minus I omega x at minus I, the complex conjugate variable. And similarly for this one. In that case, the U dependence is determined simply from the residues. Because the operator product of partial x with e to the I omega x is just I omega times 1 over U minus I. So we get omega 1 times 1 over U minus I from this pole and 1 over U plus I from the image, which in fact comes with the opposite omega 1. So this is what we get from this pole, and similarly for the other one, we get this factor. And whatever is left over is the integrand of the CC amplitude. Okay, we haven't written it down, but whatever is left over is the integrand of the CC amplitude. Now, suppose we do the U integral first. We close the U contour in the upper half plane, and in that process, we can just pick up the residues at I and IY. And this is straightforward, and we get the integrand after doing the U integral to be minus I times omega 1 plus omega 2 times the integrand from the CC amplitude. And this is exactly what we get, what we expect for a collective coordinate. We have got minus I times the total energy times the CC amplitude. So if this was all there was to it, then we would conclude that phi is the same as phi tilde, because the coupling of phi, at least for up to this order, where the coupling of phi to CC is exactly what we expect for the coupling of phi tilde to CC. However, the subtlety comes from the fact that there are divergences as y goes to 0. So while you may be okay, I guess maybe one may be lazy, and one may declare that okay, let's first do the u integral and then we will do the y integral, okay, taking care of the divergence. Then this argument still holds. But the point is that once you have committed to using string field theory, okay, you have to use the rules of string field theory all the way. So you cannot simply decide that we will do the u integral first and then the y integral. We have to follow what the rules of string field theory gives us, and that's what we will try to do in the next slide. Okay, we'll discuss what string field theory instructs us to do, and then we'll give the results. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, so let me then move to the next slide. So what string field theory tells us is that in order to compute CCO amplitude, you have to sum over Feynman diagrams. All Feynman diagrams with internal open string states. Again, we are not including Feynman diagrams with internal closed string states because we assume that they have been integrated over. So here are the Feynman diagrams with internal open string states. These are the ones which take care of the divergences. And you see that all of these vortices have already been introduced. This is CO vortex, this is triple O vortex, and this is COO vortex. Okay, so they have all been introduced. So you can use that to compute these diagrams, and then whatever region is left over is here in the contact. Okay. So this calculation is straightforward. It follows exactly the same procedure that I described in the previous slides. For example, here you will have you will start with 3 copies of the upper half plane, because one for each vortex, Z, Z prime, and Z double prime. Okay. Then we will write down the swinging relation for this propagator and the swinging relation for this propagator. And then we will see where the various vortex operators get mapped to, okay, say in the Z plane. And then by appropriate SL2R transformation, we bring them to the positions I, Y, and E. And then you do the integral. Okay, the integrand, of course, is given here. Okay, it's only how you treat these integrals, where you cut it off, is what is determined by string field theory. So after doing all that, this is the result that we get. Okay, I have not described the details because computation is relatively straightforward. Now let's compare it with the expected result for the phi tilde coupling, okay, where phi tilde is the genuine collective mode. So expected result of the phi tilde coupling is minus I times omega 1 plus omega 2 times the CC amplitude. And the CC amplitude we have computed before. These factors, of course, we had not displayed earlier, but the actual CC amplitude we had computed before. So maybe I can go back and remind you that this factor is the same as what we computed in F. Here. This is the CC amplitude that we had computed. So we expect the CC amplitude should be minus I omega 1 plus omega 2 times this. Now this is of course the divergent part. For the finite part, there is a problem. Okay? For the finite part, you exactly get into minus I omega 1 plus omega 2 times the finite part. It's a divergent part that you have to worry about. So that's it here. And now we see that these two are not the same. Minus half is fine. There is an extra factor of lambda tilde over pi. And here you have a lambda tilde. What was lambda tilde? Lambda tilde was lambda times alpha, whereas here you have lambda. So this means that there is an extra piece we have in the CC phi amplitude. Okay, that's here. And this extra piece has to be accounted for by postulating appropriate relation between phi and phi tilde, because as far as phi tilde coupling is concerned, it should be just this. So what we will discuss now is how to find this appropriate relation between phi and phi tilde that will get rid of this extra piece. Are there questions?
So suppose we do the u integration first and then do the y integration, then we won't see this piece. Is that what we are?
Yeah,
what
but
we are
that's
trying to say?
I mean, contrary to what string field theory will tell you to do.
Okay, okay.
In string field theory, there is a confusion about which one integral you should do first, right? Because all integrals are perfectly well defined, right? The ones which are divergent, there are replacement rules, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's what you have to do.
Okay.
If you do the u integral first, then you will get this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Can I try to say something and see if you agree? So in the Wojcik computation, if you're fixed to zero momentum, the computation is ambiguous because the contact terms can't be removed by doing by choosing momentum appropriately. So when you chose two of the ones to be fixed, normally it doesn't matter which ones you fix, but that's because of this. I mean, when you have zero momentum, then there's subtleties. And is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly the point. Okay, so this term, okay, this extra piece, we can reformulate by saying that there is a contribution to the effective action that you have to get rid of, right? So what is the contribution to the effective action? So this is a coupling between phi and two C's, right? Because this is a phi CC, the CCO amplitude. So one phi and two closed string tachyons. Okay. So you can represent this by as if there is an extra coupling of this form. This 2, okay, is a reflection of the fact that we have two C's. So when you actually consider the Feynman diagrams from here, you will get a factor of 2 from the combinatorial factor. So you can easily convince yourself that this is if there is a term in the effective action of this kind, that produces an extra term of this kind. So now let's just leave this aside and note that there is also an usual expected phi C interaction terms. If in the phi C coupling, there is no extra term, because in the phi C coupling, the C is sitting at the origin, okay, at the center of the disk or at I in the upper plane, and your phi is on the real line, right? So there is no divergence. So there you get the expected coupling, namely minus I phi times omega times the closed string one point function, that's here. So there is an effective phi C coupling in the action of this kind. Okay, now suppose we make a field definition of the following form, where A, so here phi goes to phi tilde plus phi tilde times C with some appropriate coefficient. This A is this factor over here, that's the same as this factor up to a minus sign. So let's take this and substitute in the effective action. So when phi, if you pick the phi tilde term here, you will get minus I by 2 GS phi tilde times the rest. This term will not affect here because that's of our GS square, right? So that you don't worry about. But when you substitute this in this term in the action, you will get an extra piece. You will of course get it to be minus I phi tilde times this, but you will get an extra piece which is a minus I GS phi tilde times 2 momentum integrals, 2 energy integrals, and 2 factors of C. And you can convince yourself, okay, by just you have to symmetrize in omega and omega prime at the end, okay, after you have substituted, okay, and you can convince yourself that with this choice, with this particular field change of variable, with this particular field definition, okay, with A given by this, the extra term that you get from here, okay, that when you substitute for phi, okay, this piece when substituted here exactly cancels this piece. So this is the field definition that you are looking for. Are there questions? Okay, so here again I have written down this field definition. So now the idea is that we are starting with integral d phi, that's the BV path integral. Then we convert them into integral over d phi tilde, okay, because we want the phi tilde dependence to have the simple form of e to the I omega phi tilde. But in that process, you pick up a Jacobian, okay, which is here, okay, from d phi to d phi tilde. Okay, there are of course higher order terms which I have ignored. Okay. This you can also write as exponential. Okay. And once you have written this as an exponential, okay, this you can regard as a new contribution to the effective action, which gives a one-point function of C. And that's exactly what we have been computing, one-point function on the annulus. Okay, this has a correct structure. In fact, okay, I should have written it perhaps slightly differently because the action already has a 1 over G string. Okay, so this G string eventually shouldn't be there if you normalize the action as starting with 1 over G string. Okay. But in any case, the net upshot, okay, is that you have a coupling of this kind, and this will give a new contribution to the one-point function of C, okay, and that's this one. Okay, that's just the same. Okay. These two psi hyperbolic pi omega pi, this we are already factoring out, okay, because this is this one-point function, and you always normalize by this one-point function. Okay. So that gives a new contribution to G of omega that we have been computing. Okay. That's given by this.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So here you determine this field redefinition knowing that knowing how the amplitude is supposed to depend on the d-synchrone moduli to begin with by this exponential. Now, if you have more than one d-synchrones, the moduli space is not translation invariant. What would be the more general strategy to determine the field redefinition?
In that case, I would say that you don't do any field definition. For the center of mass coordinate, you do a field definition. See, we are doing this field definition because you want to get the delta omega term. See, the problem is the following: that suppose you said, okay, so we could take the viewpoint that why care about field definition? We just do a path integral over phi anyway, right at the end. But we determine the dependence on phi quadratically, right? So we don't know the full dependence on phi. Okay. If we knew the full dependence on phi, then we didn't need to actually find this field definition. We could just carry out the integral over phi. So here we are trying to do this field definition because we know from the beginning that the phi tilde dependence has this exponential structure. And using this exponential structure, we can get the energy conserving delta function. So I would say that if we have two d instantons, then for the center of mass, again, you find the particular field definition and get this integral. For the other one, we do the integral explicitly. After you have gotten the dependence on phi, you try to do the integral explicitly for multi-instantons.
Well,
yes,
I guess what is not clear to me is what would be the a priori way to determine the measure on the moduli space? Because I mean, isn't because you know here you kind of you know what it is up to overall normalization because translation invariant. But I mean, it seems to be tied to this question because if you want to say what the Jacobian is, sort of have to know what the starting point. I mean, how do you know a priori what the correct measure is?
Yeah. So the point is that the BV already tells you what the correct measure is. You cannot do anything about that, right? Except for the overall normalization, which is constant. The BV fixes the measure. Okay, because you have introduced the fields and anti-fields in the open string field theory. Okay. So, and you have chosen a particular Lagrangian submanifold. Okay. After that, BV doesn't allow for any ambiguity in the measure. Okay. That's why we know that the measure to begin with is just integral d phi. And that will be the case even if you have multiple d instantons. The measure will be just integral d phi 1 d phi 2, where phi 1 and phi 2 are what you get from the open string field theory.
I see. Thanks.
Okay. Are there other questions? Okay, so we are not done yet. Okay, but let's at this stage add up the results that we have gotten so far, okay, for the divergent part of G. Okay. As we discussed earlier, okay, it had the structure of AG plus BG times omega square. So this is the annulus contribution. This is the psi 1 exchange contribution here, and from phi redefinition, this is what we got. So we can now add this up and use the fact that lambda tilde is alpha times lambda, and we get at least there are some cancellations. We can see that these two cancel, the F dependence goes away, and we still have some lambda dependence, okay, because we have lambda tilde over 2 pi by adding these two, and here you have minus lambda tilde over pi. And when you combine these two and use the fact that lambda tilde is alpha times lambda, we get half omega squared times log lambda squared by 4. Okay, so I'm going to discuss this formula once more in the next slide. So what we see is that the contribution so far is this, and what remains is to take into account the redefinition of the host field and the associated Jacobian. Yeah, and this is what I'll try to describe in the next few slides. But at this stage itself, one can say that because the host field coupling is not sensitive to omega, and we'll see this maybe a little more explicitly later, on general grounds, so one can argue that the host field redefinition will not affect the coefficient of the term proportional to omega square. So basically, BG is not going to get any further corrections. So that fixes BG at this stage to be half omega squared times log lambda squared by 4. This one will get further corrections. Of course, it has to get further corrections because we have argued that this is an observable. Okay, by comparing with the matrix model results, we can actually determine this AG if you look at the higher point functions. So it better be that this lambda tilde dependence goes away at the end. So what I'm going to describe next is how to go ahead and compute the correction to AG because of the ghost field redefinition. Okay. As I have already said, this calculation is not complete yet, but I'll tell you where we are at present. Are there questions? Okay. So we turn to now ghost field redefinition. Okay. So here it's psi 2 not psi square. Okay. So remember that we had chosen this particular gauge fixing in which you keep both the fields and throw away the anti-fields. So psi 1 and psi 2 are the fields. Okay. Psi 1 corresponding to C1 on vacuum. Okay. That we discussed earlier. You can take into account that because it has a finite propagator. Psi 2 on the other hand is a coefficient of the vacuum. Okay. This decouples from the action. Okay. That's by ghost number conservation. This in fact corresponds to a ghost field. Okay. And we also know the ghosts are gauged correspond to actually gauge transformation parameters. So you can also think of this as representing some gauge transformation parameter. So while psi 2 is a ghost field associated with the vacuum, there is also a string field theory gauge transformation parameter that is associated with the same state vacuum. And this is important because this will give us a physical interpretation of what the psi 2 integral is doing. So let's call the gauge transformation parameter in string field theory, okay, that's associated with the state vacuum as theta. And in this notation, integration over the ghost field psi 2 corresponds to division by integral of over theta. Because psi 2 is Grassmann or theta is Grassmann even. Okay. Otherwise, they are in one-to-one correspondence. So when you say that we are left with an integral over the ghost field psi 2, basically it means that we are left with having to divide by integral over d theta. So in the path integral, we have to include a factor of 1 over integral d theta. And so what we will try to discuss is how to treat this. Okay, what it means to divide by 1 over integral d theta and what we get. Okay, is this point clear? Okay, so the strategy that we are going to follow, okay, again, here there is no ambiguity in the measure. Okay, we have to integrate over psi 2 without any extra factor, integral d psi 2, which means that we have to divide by integral d theta. Okay, there is no ambiguity in any major factor over here. But our strategy will be that we will compare the transformation generated by theta to the transformation generated by the rigid U1 gauge transformation parameter theta tilde. Okay, this we had discussed in the first day probably, that theta represents the rigid U1 gauge transformation. So by comparing these transformation laws, we will try to find a relationship between theta and theta tilde. So we expect again that to leading order theta and theta tilde should be the same, and then there will be further corrections. Once we have done that, we will express d theta as some Jacobian times d theta tilde, because we will find the explicit relation between theta and theta tilde. And then we will drop division by integral d theta tilde, because this now represents the volume of the rigid U1 gauge tube. So that's just a constant factor, so you can just drop this. But in that process, we get a factor of 1 over j, because we had 1 over integral d theta to begin with, and now we have modified it by 1 over j d theta tilde. So this 1 over j, after you exponentiate, will give correction to the effective action, okay, and hence also to amplitudes, and that is something you have to take into account. Are there questions?
Yeah, can you remind me what this rigid U1 gauge transformation is?
Yeah, in fact, you will see it in the next slide, but I can say it right now. So every D brain has a U1 gauge living on it, right? Even so, this rigid U1 is when the gauge transformation parameter doesn't depend on the space-time coordinates. On the D instanton, there are no space-time coordinates. So this is the only we only have the rigid U1. So basically, every state that lives on the D instanton is invariant under this rigid U1.
I see. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So that causes a complication, and we will see how to handle that.
Wait, but then what's the difference between theta and theta tilde?
We'll see. We'll see that theta and theta tilde will be related by field definition. Okay, but yeah, we'll see exactly how to get that relation between theta. So both are gauge transformations. Right? Theta is open string gauge transformation, right? Which we know from BB what it is. Theta tilde is a gauge transformation that is rigid U1, right? And we'll see how to distinguish between theta and theta tilde in a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so here is the same statement again. Under rigid U1, all open string states on the D instanton are neutral. So we cannot distinguish between U1, the theta transformation and theta tilde transformation, just by looking at open string states on the D instanton. So what we'll do is to bring another spectator D instanton on top of the original D instanton. This has no dynamics, we don't care about the dynamics of this. But now what happens is if we take an open string that is stretched from the original D instanton to the spectator, that will be charged under the rigid U1. Okay, just like in ordinary D branes, right? Because that's in the same way that coincident D branes have U1 getting enhanced to U2. So all the off-diagonal open strings are charged under the diagonal U1s. The same thing will happen here. So open string stretched from original D instanton to the spectator is charged under rigid U1. And of course, if you have an open string that is stretched from the spectator to the original D brane, they're oppositely charged under the same rigid U1. So now at least we have something that transforms under rigid U1. And we can compare this with how it transforms under the open string gauge transformation that is generated by theta. And that's what we'll try to do. Is this clear? Okay, so let's say chi is any string field component in the open string sector that stretches from the original D instanton to the spectator D instanton. It could be C del X, for example, or any open string component, any string field component. So let's say C times W is the vertex operator associated with this field. Okay, there is an associated Chan pattern factor, of course, which I have not written down yet. Okay, but we'll see this when we actually study the computation. Okay. So under rigid U1, transformation is fixed, right? Because this is infinitesimal transformation. So chi goes to e to the I theta tilde times chi. So infinitesimal version is delta chi is equal to I theta tilde chi. And there are no further corrections. Okay? All open strings just pick up a simple phase e to the I theta tilde. So now the goal will be to compare this with delta chi that we generate by open string gauge transformation parameter theta. Now the open string gauge transformation are well understood. Okay, there are well understood gauge transformation rules. So that's what we'll use to figure out what is delta chi under the open string gauge transformation parameter theta. So it turns out that the leading term in the transformation law comes from the disk 3-point function of CW, C del C times W, and I. I is the identity operator. That's the vortex operator for the vacuum, right? Because theta multiplies the vacuum. Okay, so that's the vortex operator for I. This is the vortex operator for chi itself. And this one is basically projecting onto chi. Okay, so this is a conjugate state to chi. You see there are two chi's here in this formula, right? Delta chi. Okay, so here we are trying to project. We first transform the string field and then project onto the chi direction. Okay? So the C del C times W essentially plays the role of making sure that we are computing delta chi. And C times W basically tells us that we have a chi field present in the right hand side. So leading term is just this 3-point function. Okay, in fact, this basically reduces to the 2-point function because I doesn't do anything. Okay, and that's just 1. Okay, up to normalization. And this gives delta chi equal to I theta chi. So at the leading order, there's a confusion. Theta tilde is the same as theta. However, it turns out that if you follow the open string gauge transformation laws, then at higher order, there are corrections. This formula receives corrections at higher order. This formula, of course, remains the same. And that's why we'll see that we need a field definition to take us from theta to theta tilde. Other question? Okay. So here I have given the general form of the correction. Okay, in fact, the part that we'll need. Okay, I'll say how to compute this. So what is the form? Okay, so this is the leading term. The correction that we'll be interested in has the structure. There's a G-string coupling. And then you have some known function, computable function h of omega. We'll see how to compute h times the closed string state, the closed string tachyon state. And of course, there are many other terms, okay, involving other fields, multiple fields, okay, powers of fields, and so on. So I have only written down this because this is what we'll be interested in. So open string gauge, the gauge transformation laws in open string field theory tells us how to compute h, and it's essentially given by again an amplitude. The amplitude contains now not just 3 O's which we had earlier. So leading order we had just 3 O's of these. Now we also have to insert a C. So we need an amplitude with 1 closed string vortex operator and 3 open string vortex operators. The closed string vortex operator will take to be the closed string tachyon, and the 3 open string vortex operators are the same. Okay, because we are trying to look for delta chi equal to I theta chi times something. So assuming that we know h, we'll get a relationship between theta tilde and theta, and that will also give a relation between the d theta and d theta tilde. These are of course just one even variables. They are gauge transformation parameters. So we have just taken the inverse of this because we want to write d theta as d theta tilde on something. And once you have determined this, we know what to do by division. Okay. So if we divide by integral d theta, that basically means that we have an extra factor of this kind in the path integral. Okay. This is a Jacobian. because you are taking the inverse of this, because you are looking at 1 over integral d theta. So this can be exponentiated, and this again can be regarded as an extra term in the effective action, which generates a 1-point function of C. And that is additional contribution to G omega. Are there questions? Okay.
So as we so one thing, so as we redefine the fields, I'm just trying to understand the relation between theta and theta tilde physically in that sense. So as we redefine the fields, the gauge transformation of the open strings, we want to see how it represents in terms of the U1 gauge transformation, rigid U1 gauge transformation. Is it?
Yeah. So this is independent of the field redefinition. This is parameter redefinition, the gauge transformation parameter redefinition. So the open string field theory has a gauge transformation parameter, that is theta, and string just from conformal field theory you have a gauge transformation parameter, that is theta tilde. And the point is theta and theta tilde are not the same; they are in general related by a functional relationship, and that's what we are trying to look for. Because you are supposed to divide by integral d theta, but what is simple is integral d theta tilde, because that you can drop. This is just a rigid U1 gauge group volume.
Oh,
right? So
okay,
that can drop.
That's why we want to transfer to theta tilde, so that we can just.
This one is simple, right? This is just rigid U1 gauge group volume. That's as a constant.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how you can drop this.
Okay.
But in that process, we get this extra factor that you have to take into account.
Okay.
So it's just like integral for phi tilde was simple, right? That's why you try to convert from phi to phi tilde, even though the integration measure is d phi. Right?
Right,
Similarly, here the measure that we have to use is integral d theta.
Yes.
But you want to rewrite it in terms of d theta tilde, because then you can drop it.
Thank you.
Okay. So basically, you have these 4 Feynman diagrams. Okay. And in fact, here things simplify, because you can argue that these 2 Feynman diagrams actually don't contribute. So you are only left with these 2 Feynman diagrams, and as I said, the final results are not there yet. The state in which the computation is at present is that we have a sum of many terms, each of which has either a multiple of lambda tilde over 2 pi or a multiple of half. But the relative coefficients have not been fixed, the overall normalization has not been fixed. And so till that is fixed, you don't know what the final answer is. But we do hope and we do expect that whatever be the final answer, at least the lambda tilde over 2 pi term, this should cancel, okay, because Ag is physically measurable. Okay. Whether the coefficient of half cancels or not, okay, that's yet to be seen. Okay, so here I also wanted to say about the Chern pattern factors. Okay. So you see, we have this external open string set CW, okay, but what is this state? This was a state of the string that stretches from the original d instanton to the spectator. Okay. So it carries a Chern pattern factor. If you take the original d instanton as 1 and the spectator as 2, the second d row and column, okay. So it carries a Chern pattern factor of 0, 1, 0, 0. Because it describes an open string that is stretched from the original d instanton to the spectator. This is the conjugate state. So this should carry a Chern pattern factor, that is the conjugate from spectator to the original d instanton. So that's this Chern pattern factor. And this is the gauge transformation parameter that is living on the original d instanton. So its Chern pattern factor is diagonal, but only diagonal in the 1. Right? Because you are not using gauge transformation parameter on the spectator. That's there just for comparison. Now, what this means that only one cyclic ordering contributes, right? Because you see that you can place, if you place them in this cyclic ordering, then the answer is 1. If you change the cyclic ordering, say if you bring this here and take the trace, then the result is 0. And that is good because it's of course known that if you sum over both cyclic orderings, then the result should vanish. And but that's the reason why if you have taken all these 3 states, see the vortex operator can of course also be defined on the open string that stretches from the d instanton to itself. Right? So if you have taken all of these on the original d instanton itself, then the result should have vanished, right? Because we had said that nothing is charged under EGD1. And the way the result would vanish in that case is because we'll have both cyclic ordering, because now we all have just 1 0 0 0, 1 0 0 0, and 1 0 0 0. So both cyclic ordering will contribute, and their contributions will cancel. So that's the role that the spectator plays, right? By bringing the spectator in the game, all you have done is to ensure that in these amplitudes, only one cyclic ordering of these 3 vortex operators contribute, the other cyclic ordering doesn't, so that there is no cancellation between terms. Are there questions? Okay, now let me move to this C. So this, as I have already said, is actually 2 diagrams. Okay, this is a disk with 2 holes, okay, but there is also a torus with 1 hole. Okay, that can be thought of as some kind of twisted version of this diagram. Both contribute at the same order. Okay. So here, of course, one can try to do this computation explicitly. There are various issues there, okay, but in principle, if you are brave enough, you can do this computation. Okay, this is not something you have done, okay, but I'll try to give some general argument why we believe that C is most likely 0. Okay, although there are also loopholes, possible loopholes in the argument that I'll point out. Okay. So if we look at this, okay, what this does is that it takes some leading term by a factor of C times G string. Okay, the G string I have not written down, but G string is of course there. The leading term is as a product of these 2 sine hyperbolic pi omega factors. So you can reinterpret this term as a renormalization of the instant on action by a factor of 1 minus CGS square. Because you see, if you have original instant on action was 1 over G string, right? If you multiply 1 over G string by 1 minus CGS square, then the exponent can be expanded in powers of G string, and you get e to the minus 1 over GS times 1 plus CGS. So any correction of the form that we see here, okay, can be reinterpreted as if it's renormalizing the instant on action. So what we'll try to do is to fix C by comparing this to the instant on action in the matrix model. Okay, because we know that this answer should match. Well, we'll see whether this should match matrix model answer or not, but let's just go ahead and see what we get. So let me say a few words about the matrix model. The matrix model is in fact very simple. Okay. It's free fermion in inverted harmonic oscillator potential. Okay. So the harmonic oscillator Hamiltonian is given by this. It's inverted. That's why the potential you can see it has a negative sign. Okay. This has no parameter. Okay. But if you have free fermions, the fermions are filled up to a certain Fermi level. Okay. Which if you take the this point as energy 0, then the Fermi level is negative, so let's call it minus mu. Okay. So all the energy levels up to a certain value are filled, okay. And so this mu basically acts as a parameter of the theory. And the instanton, what it does is it causes a tunneling from one side of the potential to the other side at the Fermi level. Okay. That's the role of the instanton. So it's a solution to the Euclidean equations of motion, okay, the bound solution that tunnels from one side to the other side. Okay. And the leading instant on action, the classical instant on action is 2 pi mu. Okay, this you can easily compute from this Hamiltonian. Okay. And in general, okay, if instantons are saddle points in the path integral, okay, so in any quantum mechanics or any quantum field theory, okay, once you have the saddle point, you have to start doing fluctuations around the saddle point, so that will in general renormalize the action of the instanton. But in matrix model, because the Hamiltonian is quadratic, but the action is also quadratic, we'll have no quantum corrections to the instanton action beyond 1 loop, okay, because the potential is quadratic. So the instanton action is really 2 pi mu plus constant and now no other corrections. Okay, so now if we want to compare the matrix model answer to the string theory answer, then you have to first fix the relationship between the parameters of the two theories, because nobody gives you in advance what the parameter, how the parameters should be related. So this can be fixed in many ways. Okay, you can even fix it perturbatively. You can compare perturbative amplitudes and try to fix the parameters. But the way BRY fixed this is by setting 2 pi mu equal to 1 over G string to all orders. They didn't make any correction to this formula. So which basically means that in their convention of the relationship between mu and 1 over G string, the instant on action is just 1 over G string plus a constant. The constant, of course, is just overall multiplicative factor independent of G string, but there is no order G string correction to the instant on action. So the matrix model instant on action is 1 over G string plus constant. And now if you identify this with the renormalized D instant on action, we see that the D instant on action should be 1 over G string plus constant. So there should be no correction of the form C times G string, and hence C should be 0. Now I should add a caution here, which is that by strict rules, we are only allowed to compare physical amplitudes on both sides and not instant on action, because instant on action by itself is not observable. What is observable are physical amplitudes. And indeed, as we discussed earlier, by comparing the physical endpoint amplitudes, we can fix C. Whether that agrees with what we get by comparing instant on action or not is not clear. So this argument that C equal to 0 could have loopholes. Okay, but this seems to be a reasonable guess to make at this stage. Are there questions?
So you said that once we fix AG, then C could be fixed, right? Means once we calculate AG, then C could be fixed from the values that you showed.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Then C could be fixed, or even if you don't count, even if I didn't do any of the calculations, right? In string field theory,
Yeah.
if you had just compared the perturbative results with the matrix model results, you could have fixed all of these, right? You could have fixed C, AG, AF,
Okay.
as well as that combination.
Okay.
So this is a check. This will be an additional check of the general arguments, okay, and the string field theory analysis.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Okay, so let me then summarize. So what we have seen so far is that the divergent part of F is given by AF plus BF omega 1 omega 2. AF is determined that without any ambiguity, it's minus half. BF is ambiguous, but that's not unexpected, because we see from the matrix model comparison that only this combination enters the matrix model amplitudes, okay, or the closed string tachyon amplitudes. So 2 BG minus BF also have determined from string field theory, that's minus log 4. AG is minus lambda tilde over 4 2 pi so far, plus the Gauss Jacobian contribution. As I said, this contribution at this stage is in the form of sum of several terms, each of which is either a multiple of lambda tilde over 2 pi or a multiple of half. We have to fix the coefficients and the relative signs and the overall normalization. Hopefully that will be done soon. C, we have not computed directly. General argument suggests that C is perhaps 0. Okay, but we'll see. If AG turns out to be 0, then that's a very good indication that C is 0, because we see that AF equal to minus half is, and AG and C being 0 is quite close to what we see here, right? This is close to minus half. So that would be a satisfactory answer to this problem, but we don't know whether it's true or not. 2 BG minus BF, okay, from the BRY result was close to minus 1.399. Here you get minus log 4, which is within 1% of this answer. And finally, as I've already said, AF, AG, and C can be extracted individually by comparison of the matrix model results for higher confunctions. Okay, and I think this, is not very hard. If I understand correctly from the ROI paper that the numerical data that they have is probably already sufficient to extract all of these from the matrix model results. So this will be more or less the end of my talk. Now I have 3 more slides where I have discussed the promised technical points about how to deal with, how to convert unintegrated to integrated vertex of water when you have derivatives of C. But perhaps at this stage I can pause for questions, and then I mean if people are interested, I can show those extra slides.
I have a question.
Yes.
About the C, the disk with 2 hosts, it seems that based on the prescription so far, the computation from string field theory is in principle unambiguous, right? So for this diagram.
No, it is actually ambiguous. I'll tell you why. Okay. The point is this is unambiguous, but there is also a torus with a hole, right? The torus with a hole has a dilaton tadpole. Now, there is no divergence because there is no dilaton tadpole. Okay? But this was explained actually quite nicely in one of Witten's papers, that even though there is no divergence, okay, it's what is we call conditionally convergent integral, okay, and it's ambiguous, okay, because of this dilaton one-point function. Okay? And that ambiguity is related to the our ability to redefine GS. Okay? But once you have fixed that relation, okay, the possibility of redefining GS, then there is no ambiguity.
Sorry, which is the component of string field correspond to dilaton here?
Which is the
component of the string field that correspond to the dilaton. Are you saying it's a usual kind of partial x, partial bar x?
No, not that one. It's C1 C minus 1 on vacuum. C1 C minus 1 minus C bar 1 C bar minus 1. Right? The ghost representation of the zero momentum dilaton.
I see. You say there's going to be a typo for that. I see.
Well, no, there will not be tadpole for that. But because there's a tadpole cancels, okay, but when you actually, for example, when you try to use string field theory to compute this diagram, okay, you will find that there's an ambiguity, okay, which is related to the fact that there's a marginal operator. Okay, that C1 C minus 1 minus C bar 1 C bar minus 1 is a marginal operator. So when you use, now you have to use closed string field theory because now it's in the closed string channel, right? So there is an ambiguity in related to the margin. Whenever there is a marginal operator, you will find that there is an ambiguity in computing amplitudes. Right? Now, this ambiguity can be fixed purely perturbatively. Okay, so for example, suppose you want to look at 3 tachyon amplitude. It does perturbative. Okay? And you compute the 3 tachyon amplitude up to 1 loop. And you say that we will fix G string now by comparing with the matrix model. See, this amplitude will also have the same dilaton tag. Right? 3 tachyon amplitude on a torus will have exactly the same degeneration. So using that, you can fix this ambiguity. Once you have fixed that ambiguity, then this is completely well defined. Okay, this is well defined, but the other one, the torus with a hole, that also becomes completely well defined, and then there will be no ambiguity in determining C.
I see.
But I think in your analysis, you have fixed this ambiguity by fixing the instant on action to be 2 pi. Right? This you have used this relation to without any correction.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So your field redefinition is quite similar as renormalization.
Well, it's not really renormalization. There is no divergence anywhere. Right? See, you didn't even have to do the field redefinition.
Yes.
It's that if you the reason for doing this field redefinition is because open string the field theory provides a measure, okay? And these intuitive fields, which are the collective modes and the rigid U1 gauge transformation, okay? Those we can understand physically what to do with those. Okay? That's why you are trying to carry out this field.
Okay.
So it's not really like a renormalization.
Yeah.
Okay?
So there's a field redefinition. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
We are just
that can be absorbed. Yes.
Or, yeah.
Okay.
That open string gives certain kind of fields, right? Whereas familiarity with quantum field theories deal with another kinds of fields or gauge transformation parameters. And you are just trying to convert the open string fields and gauge transformation parameters to what you are more familiar with, so that you can deal with them.
Mhm. But that can be observed by the effective action anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the field definition has a consequence in the effective action. Yes.
Mhm. Okay.
I had the question, Asha.
Yes.
These theories, all the massive states are off shell, is that correct? There's no physical massive states.
That's right. Yes.
So in some sense, does the string field theory reduce to just an ordinary field theory for the massless states? I mean, is there?
Indeed, yeah, you can integrate out all the massive states. Implicitly, that's what you have been doing. By taking this large alpha and large lambda limit, right? You have effectively integrated out all the massive states, and it can be reduced to just a function of the zero mode fields.
So it just becomes an ordinary field theory. We don't even have to talk about the string, or do we?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It becomes an ordinary field theory, but you use the BV structure that is induced from the original string field theory, right? Because the rules of breaking up the path, breaking up the Feynman diagrams, breaking up the amplitude into Feynman diagrams, that follows from the rules of string field theory.
Thanks.
So because without BV, you would not know what measure to start with, right? This is exactly the kind of the question that C was asking, that how do you know that you start with integral d phi, right? We start with integral d phi because BV tells us that, right? Or how do you know that you are dividing by integral d theta? That's because BV tells us that you should divide by integral d theta, right? That's the correct field. And then you make a redefinition to more familiar objects.
But BV is just unitarity, right? Like instead of saying the word BV, I could just ask unitarity. Is that correct?
Just use what?
The property of unitarity.
Well, maybe you can use property of unitarity, although on the D instanton by itself, I don't know how to make sense of unitarity as such. Right? There's no scattering on the D instanton, right? I mean, there is D instanton induced scattering, of course, in the closed string sector.
Okay, but it's a little strange to me that you need to use the whole BV technology just to know how to do it.
Yeah, well, maybe there is a way to get around it. See, the point is worldsheet computation is necessary, right? So it's not that it's not that you have thrown away all the massive. It's okay. Maybe I should say it this way: that it's not just that. If you think of this as a field theory of massless states, the vortices are extremely complicated, right? Because after all, you have to get all these G and F, right? I have only shown the divergent parts of G and F. Okay? The finite parts have integrals of theta functions and conformal blocks and so on. So all of those are very much present, right? So it's not that you can get rid of the worldsheet theory altogether.
Yeah. Okay. Are there other questions for Asha?
So I don't know if I should go through those 3 slides or whether maybe people can just look at them. The slides are available on the web anyway, right?
Oh, we have some time, so go ahead. I mean, may raise questions also going through the slides. So I think that's a good idea.
Okay, maybe I can go ahead. I'll explain what the problem is. Okay, so here is the technical point. Okay, so in the analysis, we encountered amplitudes where the external states, external vortex operators involve partial C, for example, right? In fact, in more general case, that could be high derivatives of C. So let's see what the problem with this is. So let's take this amplitude. Okay. So what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to take the psi1 propagator, which is -12, and multiply this by the COO amplitude, where for C we take the closed string tachyon, and for the two O's we take two psi1 vertex operators. Okay. Now two psi1 vertex operators are each partial C. So altogether you have ghost number 4, because the closed string tachyon has a C times C bar, that's ghost number 2, and each of these have ghost number 1, so that's ghost number 4, that's one too many, right? We need ghost number 3. Okay. It also can be seen from the fixing of conformal killing vectors, right? We have to begin with 4 variables, because 2 positions of the closed string vertex operator and 2 positions of the open string vertex operators. We can only fix 3. So one vertex operator has to be integrated. So the way we have set up the CO vertex is that we place the closed string at a fixed position I, and the pair of open strings at plus minus beta, and then we integrate over beta. So the question is, what is the integrand? Normally we would say that in the integrand we convert one of the open string vertex operators from unintegrated to integrated vertex operator, but that doesn't make quite sense when you have something like partial C. So what I'll do is to tell you the general rule for dealing with situations like this. So let's suppose that we have the local coordinates at the O's, which we denote by WA. Z is the upper half plane coordinate, so there is a functional relationship between WA and Z. For us, it's all SL2R transformation. In general, that can be complications. So you have WS as functions of Z. And now the general prescription is the following. The integrand will involve a correlation function of all the unintegrated vertex operators. So you start with only unintegrated vertex operators. So which means C bar times the closed string tachyon. This is coming from the Liouville and matter. So C bar times the Liouville matter vertex operator from the closed string tachyon. The unintegrated vertex operator for the first psi1 and the unintegrated vertex operator for the second psi1. And then you insert an integration measure, d beta. Okay, beta of course has to be integrated over, times this quantity over there. So here sum over A runs over all the punctures. In this case, they are all the open string punctures. In this case, there are 2. You could even also run it over the closed string punctures, because actually that doesn't contribute, because the closed string punctures are fixed positions. But in general, it runs over all punctures. Then you have an integral. Okay, this integral has to be done one at a time. So this gives anti-clockwise contour around the 8th puncture, okay, which in this case is located at WA equal to 0. You compute del FA del beta. This means that you compute the derivative of FA with respect to beta at fixed Z. Then multiply by BWA, integrate over DWA. This is a contour integral around this. And after you have done this, we have to conformally map this to the Z coordinate system, okay, by using that f.c that we introduced earlier. So this may look abstract. In the next slide, I'll give the example. But are there any questions on this so far?
One question. This is not directly for this, but when we are computing this one closed string and a psi1 loop, typically for the loop, shouldn't one have a loop integral, or one should use the fully renormalized 2-point function? Because psi1 is minus half that we saw from the like leading order, right? But
See,
there be any...
integral, okay, is over 0 dimensions, right?
Yeah.
Because there is no momentum.
Right. Only minus half is there.
And there is only single place state psi1 that is propagating, right? So in this case, the loop integrals are not there.
Okay.
So it's just minus half, right? You don't have to do any integral at all.
So like psi1 doesn't pick up any contribution or loop correction at all. Means this is psi1 propagator, which is minus half. Means
So
that we found.
We are working to order G string, right?
Yeah.
So you can consider other Feynman diagram. So there is a loop inside on psi1.
Okay. Then it will be corrected, but that is higher order.
Exactly. Higher order in G string. Exactly.
Okay.
This order in G string, that's the diagram.
Okay.
But there is no loop integral, right? I mean, on the D instant,
if
you
it
not
is constant, then there will be nothing to integrate over. So that is fine.
Exactly. So there is a K here. Okay, so let me give an illustration of this. Okay, and we'll illustrate this by the same amplitude that we mentioned earlier. So let's suppose that we have this derivative del f a del beta, and what we will do is we will take this. This is of course a function of z, okay? But you know the relationship between z and wa. Okay? That's wa equal to f a of z beta. So we can re-express the z dependence in terms of w, and write this as an expansion in powers of w. Okay? So this a some function of beta, another function of beta times wa plus order wa square. Okay, and this of course can go on. You can compute all of these if you know what f a of z beta is. So in our case, z1 is minus beta, z2 is beta. So let's compute this. So we have integral del f a del beta, dwa dwa, and then the two vortex operators that will be of interest to us is del a del c of w at w1 equal to 0 and partial c at w2 equal to 0. These are the two psi1 vortex operators. The cc bar I doesn't do anything. Okay, the closed ring vortex operator. So now let's look at the integral for a equal to 1. So for a equal to 1, the integral is around w1 equal to 0. Okay, around z equal to z1. Okay, or w1 equal to 0. Now if you look at this b partial c operator product, this is 1 over w1 square, right? Because dc is 1 over w1, but b of w1 partial c at w1 equal to 0 is 1 over w1 square. So this integral will pick up a contribution only from that term in del f a del beta, which it has 1 power of w1, right? Just by residue theorem. Lower parts of w1 or higher parts of w1 will not contribute. So the only term that contributes from here is b1 of beta. That's this, that removes. So BCOP basically removes the B and the partial C. What we are left with, of course, is partial C at W2 equal to 0. So that's this term. Then for A equal to 2, we can do a similar integral. There's a minus sign here because the B has to be passed through this partial C now. And that gives a minus sign. Yeah, but otherwise analysis is identical. You get a B2 of beta times del C at partial W1 equal to 0. So after doing this, we are instructed to convert this to the z coordinate, and that of course is done by the transformation that we had earlier. So f1 and f2 are the inverse functions of capital of f1 and capital F2. So here we had introduced the capital F by saying the wa is equal to capital F of z beta. Now z is small f1 of w1 and of course beta, and again small f z is small f2 of w2. So this is the insertion. Okay. So at the end, what you have is that you have integral d beta multiplied by a correlation function, okay, where you have this insertion, and then of course cc bar times the closed ring tachyon vortex operator. Okay. So now you see that you have a correlation function with 3 c's, right? You have a cc bar at I and another either c or partial c, because this f dot partial c contains both a c and a partial c, and that's inserted either at beta or minus beta depending on whether it's here or here. Okay. And now of course this correlation function you are familiar with, and we can proceed as usual. Okay. And this is valid not just for partial c, in fact any derivative of c you can handle this way, right? If you had say partial square c, right, then in this expansion you have to pick up the order wa square term, right? Because b with partial square c gives you 1 over w square, w cube, right? So you have to kill 2 powers of w, and that comes from this point. Okay. So this procedure has to be followed when you compute, for example, this diagram as well as this diagram.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Are you, in your convention, does dw commute with the little b? Is it Grassmann odd or Grassmann even? dw the measure.
dw. Yeah, dw is just one even. Yeah, it commutes with little b.
Grassmann even. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The other point I should have said that if you have multiple betas, right, then also this is true. You just have this factor for every beta. Okay. So you have d beta 1 times del f a del beta 1 times this, wedge d beta 2 del f a del beta 2 times this, and so on. Right? So this general formula holds not just for when you have single modulus to integrate over, but only also when you have multiple modulus to integrate. And we do encounter in our analysis the case where multiple modulus are there. For example, this amplitude. Okay. So this has two modulus, okay. And you have a del C, a partial C on the external line. So you have to follow this procedure to figure out what the integrand should be in this case.
Ashok, I thought with
Yes.
this C type of terms, you have also coupling to worldsheet curvature, dilaton term, don't you?
Sorry, I didn't get the question fully. Can you repeat once more?
If you have vertices like derivative of C, they also generate coupling to worldsheet curvature via Frachten-Zeitler mechanism. Maybe I'm confusing with something. At the level of integrated vertex, you have to also add phi r term.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the point is that here we are using a formalism where we don't think in terms of the worldsheet metric, but that is, I think this is entirely equivalent, right? So we don't couple to any curvature on the worldsheet, okay? But this procedure that I described here, I think effectively is equivalent to coupling it to the curvature on the worldsheet. Okay, but in this formalism, we really don't need to do, look at the worldsheet metric at all.
Maybe you are right. I don't remember. I think sometimes you need both this and curvature coupling. I can't remember immediately.
I see, because I know that dilaton coupling, for example, C del square C. In this formalism, you can do it without introducing the curvature coupling at all.
So that's okay. I didn't know that. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so I just sent by chat the web page for next week's workshop. So if you want to find the Zoom link or the program, the Zoom link will be, it's not on the page yet, but over the weekend we'll put it on the page. So we hope to see everybody again next week. So Ashok, I want to thank you for the great lectures. I guess you'll give another talk next week. I think everybody learned a lot. I certainly learned a lot from the lectures.
Sir, can I have a question, please?
Please, go ahead.
Perhaps it will be a bit basic one, not related to the topic. I would, can you please refer to some, hello, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh. Sir, can you please refer to some study materials to start with string theory books? Like I was going through a lot of books, but most of them are just jumbled up with a lot of theories and a lot of structures. So could you please refer to some?
Well, I would say Polchinski's 2 volumes are probably the standard reference for string textbooks, but maybe the others can suggest. Well, if you then you can start with Barton's book, Zoibach's book on string theory, basically written for undergraduates. Right? Once you read that, maybe you can start then reading Polchinski, I would say.
Could you please repeat the next name that you said, Polchinski? Yeah.
Barton Zoibach, ZW, you know that?
Yeah, and the second one that you just said.
Polchinski, Joseph Polchinski, Polchinski.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Okay, are there any other questions for Ashok? Okay, so maybe people can turn on their
Actually-
microphone. Yep, go ahead.
Maybe I can just mention, actually, next week I'm going to talk about what happens when you go from fixed to integrated picture when you want to take into account curvature on the world sheet locally. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so maybe we can all turn on our microphones and just thank Ashok by clapping. So just we get some. Okay, so again, we'll stop recording now, but people are welcome to stay online and ask Ashok questions in private. Okay, so maybe see you next week.